microphone.
Hello everyone, this is Coach Gary Zarski up here in Northern California. It's raining, it's windy, and it's cold. And I've been asked by Coach Gary to put something in video so it can be a part of Mark's celebration of Life Day, which you all are all there for. Unfortunately, I can't travel anymore, and my wife Diane is filming this, and neither one of us are techies, so I hope it comes out. I'm going to be ad-libbing, so I'm sure I'm going to make some mistakes. But for right now, I'd like to begin this by telling you something weird and ironic that I did Mark's senior year. And I'll get you to his senior year in just a moment with some stories, hopefully that will entertain or make you shake your head up and down because you've seen it and experienced Mark before. But underneath his name in one of those basketball programs, a lot of you remember we used to have, for some reason, I found a quote from Henry David Thoreau, a famous American writer, and I got this quote, and it was something that struck me as, this is Mark BACA. So under his picture, or alongside of it, I put down this quote, and I'd like to read it to you to begin this. I have learned this, at least by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. Today, 41 years later, I look at this page and I wonder, how did that happen where that applied to Mark BACA then and also today? My journey with Mark began his 10th grade year. And some of you remember I was teaching a law class, and they were pretty packed, and this young man came to see me after one of my classes and said he'd like to take my class. And I said, I can't get you in. I have no more seats. The class is full, and I don't take 10th graders. So he kept after me. And the thing I noticed about him that broke me down was he had this laugh and this giggle that really affected me in a positive way. So I let him in, not knowing what was going to happen in the next 3 years. So he came to class the next day, and he sat on the floor in the back of the room, and I started lecturing. And as some of you know, I like to use humor, or attempted to use humor in my classes, and I think it worked. My goal was to make kids come to school, attract them to something that they liked, so that maybe we would get a chance to trick them with humor so they could learn something. I included a lot of students in my lectures, and I developed a technique of picking on certain students that I felt obviously could take it. And Mark sat back and he watched this, and he started thinking to himself, you know, I've been picked on ever since I was in elementary school. I don't have confidence. I don't know how to protect myself. From that moment on, Mark worked on me, talked with me before school, during school, after school, for days and days and weeks, and even after he graduated. And he developed this technique of firing back at people. And he diffused a lot of people who were picking on him. And he got more and more confident using this technique, and he also gained a lot of respect because people he picked on liked it. I'll never forget that about Mark. And during that year, he attached to me and asked if he could become a part of the basketball program. And at the time, we were full there too. But as you know, Mark can be persistent. Mark can be aggressive. And Mark can laugh and giggle, which breaks you down. So I let him be manager. And he was a handful. And with the team being a handful, I had quite a bit of issues that I always had to deal with every year. But when Mark was on, he helped me. He picked me up when I was down. He picked the team up. He knew how to make them laugh, and he knew how to get in their faces. So after that year, which was successful, Mark continued to come to all my law classes. At one time I asked him during his junior year, Mark, you're in my classes all the time. Don't you go to other classes? And a typical Mark reaction was, Coach, I got it covered. And I said, well, you better not get in trouble. Got it covered, Coach. So his junior year, he had another idea. He's always full of ideas. So he came to me and he said, hey, Coach, this year I don't want to be a manager. I would like to elevate that position for me. So I listened to him and I said, well, what is it you want to do? And he says, I really want to be known as a player coordinator. I said, okay, what are you going to do? He says, well, I'm going to be kind of on the sidelines, motivating, encouraging the players and the team, getting in their face, and letting the other guys manage the team by taking care of the uniforms and the balls. And so I thought about it, and I really liked Mark at this time. And so I said, because he was good for the program, I said to him, all right, let's try it. That's a pretty good idea. Let's try it. So his junior year, he was player coordinator, and he did a very good job. As you know, we had some pretty good teams, and Mark, I would say, helped lift a lot of spirit on those teams. But at the end of the season, he came to me, he said, hey, Coach, I got another idea. I go, all right, Mark, what's this one? He says, I know you have big banquets, and you give a lot of trophies. And he says, I probably don't have a chance to be the coach's award winner, but I have a new award you could give out. I go, well, what's the new award? And he says, well, let's call it, Coach, the Wildfire Award. And I said, well, who do you give it to? He says, well, you give it to me. I said, well, what is it? He says, well, it's to anybody in your program that is overly dedicated, overly loyal, and follows all the values and principles that you have within your program. Oh boy. So I sat back and I thought to myself, Mark's starting a program, a new award that he wants to get. So I kind of discussed it with the staff, and of course we all kind of laughed at how clever he was, and persistent and aggressive. So we started the new award called the Wildfire Award, and when he got it at the banquet, he got a standing ovation. At this point in time, I learned, as a lot of you know, that Mark didn't have a lot of confidence in himself. He was sensitive. He had a hard time understanding if people liked him or they didn't like him. He didn't feel he was liked that much, and so I spent many hours picking him up, motivating, firing him up, that he was popular and everybody liked him. He didn't buy it. So it was something that I had to work with, sometimes on the telephones at night. And I stayed in there with him because he was special. Mark was very special. And with all of you sitting in there today, that's probably the key word of this celebration. Mark was special. So after the award was giving, the next year he comes to me with another idea. I go, oh boy, what's this one? And he says, hey, Coach, I want to be on the team. I want to be a player. And prior to this, I had established a new player on the team 2 years earlier when he was a sophomore, called the Enforcer. And the Enforcer was a big guy at Sweetwater High School, mostly football players, that I needed in practice to bang some of the players around so that we could be physical when we go into the games. My first enforcer was John Salamua. My second enforcer was James Kilmer, two outstanding young men. So now Mark wanted to be the enforcer. So he did everything he could to convince me that he was as good as John Salamua and James Kilmer. And I remember I laughed because he said to me, "Hey coach, I'm 225 pounds now. I can handle it." And I looked at him, and when he said that, I heard him laugh and giggle, and right then and there I said, "All right, Mark, let's try it." So I gave him a uniform, number 50. He became part of the team. I believe there was always a position on the team for a student athlete like Mark, who maybe wasn't as talented, but could add something to the team. Later on down the road, I had a Mark BACA lecture at the university levels when I taught coaching classes. And in this, I had a lot of young coaches who were trying to get ideas on how you build a program. And I would tell the story of Mark BACA, the enforcer. And the student coaches would laugh and giggle, and eventually they chose somebody like Mark on their teams, and I got a lot of feedback on that. But during his senior year as a player, I put him in some games. He scored. He was not a disruption. We took him on some trips, and I'm glad I didn't know what he did, because I heard later Mark made the trips a little extra fun, which I don't know. I'm glad I didn't know. But that year at the banquet, we had another young man join our program by the name of Jesse Gary. And he was the player coordinator. And I remember at the banquet, because of Mark, Jesse Gary got the second Wildfire Award. Once again, a standing ovation at the banquet. Mark continued to be in touch with me and stayed in touch with the basketball program until I left. And I passed the torch of Mark BACA to Jesse Gary, who was coaching there with some other coaches. And he grew. He grew a part of the program. He grew a part of Sweetwater. He grew a part of the football program. And I think it was one of the greatest things that saved him from going the wrong way, taking the wrong road with his ideas and his programs and being involved with all of us. To this day, he remains one of my all-time favorite students. And I thought about him a lot, and he used to communicate with me up here in Northern California. I saw him a year and a half ago when I came down to a gathering that Coach Gary had set up for ex-players, and the first thing he did when he got out of his car, he walked towards me, he laughed, and he giggled. Gave me a big hug, which about broke me in half, but I felt emotional when I saw him and when I left him. I had one of the greatest honors I've ever had talking to Mark when he was ill, just before he passed. And we had great talk. Jesse was a part of it. And to this day, I can tell all of you from learning all my years with Mark, he was a very loving young man. He was caring. He was always looking for an edge. And he always knew that he had a sense of humor and he had a wit about himself. And he started applying all of this to his dealings in adulthood and made a lot of friends and was respected. But I'm kind of curious because I know that when Mark goes up to heaven, or he's in heaven right now, he's walked up to God and he said, look, I got an idea. I have something I'd like to try. And I'm sure God looked down at him like I did and listened to him and got at the very end of that smile and giggle and said, okay, let's give it a try. And that's what he's doing up there now, and he's going to continue to do every year, and he's going to take those ideas, be a part of the team in heaven and look down on all of us. And I know for a fact he's going to walk the hallways of Sweetwater High School. And to this day, I hope all of you remember this short little stories about Mark because you experienced similar things. And I just would like to leave you with the fact that Mark loved his family, and I'd like Herman and Nadine to know that he always had you in his heart, spoke often about how much he loved his family. And I know that some of you sitting there were friends, and believe me, he knows, and he knew that you were a friend. So thank you for listening, and I hope the rest of this goes well. And I'd like to thank Jesse and Gary for putting it together and making me a part of it. So please carry Mark in your heart. Thank you.